Which would be your favourite of the Arba'a Min'im, the four species mentioned in Leviticus 23:40 that we just heard? The branches are grand, our attention drawn to them in the thwacking and rustling of the waving. But in truth, there's no competition. The Etrog demands our attentions, our sniffs, and our taste buds. Some make jam or marmalade after the fact. Others infuse gin or vodka. However, the Etrog would seem to be a fairly late addition to the quartet. As we noted in our Torah reading, Sukkot is called the Feast of Booths, involving no work but lots of offerings. Then the whole section on the festivals is drawn to a close. And we get additional verses added on clearly from another source that outlines what we now call the Arba'im Minim, the four speeches. In other passages of the Tanakh, the entire Hebrew Bible, the festival is about the harvest, or the offerings at the tabernacle or temple, or as a symbol of God's ultimate supremacy in messianic times. The passage that I chose for reading as our Haftarah describes the reinstitution of Sukkot by Ezra and those who return from Babylonian exile. Ezra's main shtick was to return Torah and its commandments as the central guidebook for living in the land in the late 6th century BCE. Of relevance to us on Sukkot, it was all about the booth. The only species mentioned are leafy branches. But what were they? Olive trees, pine trees, myrtles, palms, and other trees. What can we understand from this list? Firstly, that the ones mentioned were likely ubiquitous in the area that the Israelites dwelt in at the time. Secondly, the practice was not clearly established, for there was wriggle room, the allowance to add in other bountiful boughs, perhaps of species common or specific in certain locales. Indeed, we also note that you can count at least 5 different species, not 4. They weren't the 4 species in Nehemiah's time. But no etrog, citron, or any other fruit is mentioned. So where or when does the etrog come in? The rabbis in the Talmud, the rabbinic understanding and explanations of the Torah, go through their usual intellectual gymnastics routines, but all pretty much to use scripture to justify what had become a custom already. They do, though, raise an interesting question. Say that the hadar, because it doesn't say etrog in the Torah, it says hadar, the fruit of the hadar tree. Say that the hadar is a pepper tree. They do these crazy things, the rabbis. They did not mean bell peppers, but the plant that peppercorns come from. That is plainly ridiculous. As firstly, the command is for a singular fruit, a pri, not pirot. So one single peppercorn? Just too small. Certainly not grand enough. And in any case, the peppercorn does not come from a tree. Our ancient and medieval commentators are truly stumped to explain what had become a norm by the time of Josephus, the 1st century historian. We have to put him in inverted commas because not by our standards today, but historian, maybe put him more like a newspaper reporter of a certain ilk. By his time, he explained of the time of the Maccabees that we should carry them in our hands, a branch of myrtle and a willow and a palm of a tree with the addition of a citron. So by the 1st century BCE, the etrog had made its way in, but from where? David Z. Moster, in his book, Etrog, How a Chinese Fruit Became a Jewish Symbol, explains the geographic and textual story behind the citrus fruit that has more seeds than pulp, never rots, but instead slowly dries out, and appears in our marketplace at exorbitant prices for the sole purpose of being waved together with branches from 3 trees indigenous to the Middle East on this festival of Sukkot. The short story is that when Darius I conquered China in 518 BCE, you can tell that I learnt this from elsewhere because, as Dad would say, my history is rubbish, the fruit spread through Persia. Throughout their vast empire, the Persians built royal outposts with generously irrigated ornamental gardens called paradisa, or paradises. As Moster explains, these paradises were botanical gardens, zoological enclosures, and lodges meant for hunting, leisure, dining, and accommodation, of course, for the ruling classes. One of these paradises was constructed after the Babylonian exile and before the conquests of Alexander the Great, that is, between 538 BCE and 332 BCE, in Ramat Rachel, which sits on the outskirts of present-day Jerusalem and today is home to a kibbutz. So the rabbis, looking for a fruit to identify with the Hadar tree, found a contender on a day trip to their equivalent of Kew, Wisley, or the Eden Project. Whatever the ritual wranglings over which is your favourite of the 4 species, to help us to have fun and to celebrate and rejoice on this Man Simchatenu, this season of joy, of course we also look to our liberal Jewish values to underpin the festival. We learn that it is good to use local produce, and at the same time it's also good to welcome external influences. Maybe sometimes importing is not great for the carbon footprint, but maybe once a year, to have something special to complement what is local may be very good for the soul and perhaps expands our understanding as well. It is certainly better than the malafophonim, the cucumbers that are growing on my, yeah, they're not even trees, they're plants. But that welcoming in of different influences. Today we welcome the Mayor and Mayoress of Hillingdon. And just as we hope that we might bring some of our wisdom, be it ancient or contemporary, to the borough of Hillingdon and in this world of technology throughout the world, may we also learn from other peoples the beauty, the agricultural beauty, the deliciousness, and also the spice of wisdom that we can learn from others. And of course, it was great to hear of Navratri, the Hindu festival that thinks of other people at this time and providing food for those in need. This coming Saturday, please do bring your donations to the Sukkot table that again this year will be taking to New Hope in Watford, the project that seeks not just to help homeless people, but to prevent homelessness. And also to our local food banks. But let us not stop there. As my kippah says, let us make poverty history. Food poverty is a stain on a wealthy society such as ours. Let us think what we can do, not only to provide food for people, but to ensure that they are able to provide food for themselves, as is right in a society like ours. When we make poverty history, when we were all able to celebrate in joy at each of our harvest times, then we can truly say, Baruch atah Adonai, Eloheinu melech haolam, borei peri ha'etz. We praise you, Eternal One, our God, Sovereign of the universe, Creator of the fruit of the tree.